Hello viewing millions, welcome back. Today I am going to look at these two brush sets that were sent to me by Jackson's as part of the products they've asked me to review. And they did actually send me three types of brushes. This brush from their Acquia range is for heavy body acrylic or for oil, and I'm going to deal with that separately. These two sets are the watercolour, and they're quite different, and I was originally going to do two completely separate videos, but I thought actually what's probably better for you guys is if I do one video with them and try and compare them a little bit and compare them to other types of brush that are on the market. So just to explain what these two sets are, the first set here is the Studio Synthetic set number 1, and obviously there's a whole range of Studio Synthetic brushes by them. These are just a straight synthetic that I read was similar to Prolene in general terms, so it's probably a polypropylene rather than Nylon, and they've got a recommended retail price of £11, but they're currently on sale for £5.50 at the time I'm filming this. So if you go down there into the video description, you're going to find a link over to my website where I'll write a bit more about these products so that you've got it in a format you can read again if you need it. And that will have links to buying them all and going over to Jackson's to get them so that you don't have to hunt around, which will save you lots of time. So these are a studio set, i.e. student grade effectively. I suspect they're probably better than most student grade brushes on the market, however. And in this set you get a size 8 round, a size 10 round and a 1/2 inch flat. That's what's there, and you can see they're that kind of shiny synthetic that you often get. They're completely vegan brushes, which is obviously a really important thing for many of my viewers. This second set are from the Icon range, and it's the Icon 3 brush set. And in this set you get a size 8 round, a 1/2 inch flat again, so something we can compare between the two sets, and what they refer to as a size 2 quill, which is what I would call a mop. I know to some people that this kind of brush is a mop. To me, these are mops, and the reason they're referred to as quills, I read on one website, which I thought was really funny, it's because they're shaped like a porcupine quill. It's not, it's because this piece here that binds them together, which I'll show you in a minute, is traditionally made of goose quill, although this is synthetic. Now these brushes have a mixture of a synthetic with natural Sable, so these are not vegetarian or vegan friendly, or at least not vegan friendly, strictly speaking. So they're supposedly more absorbent, they're a bit higher quality. Recommended retail price is £16.50, but this set is £13.20 at the moment, and again it will be linked to over on my website. Now these have got, in this set, the Icon set, the fibres, the synthetic fibres that are in there have been made with lots of little sort of invaginations across them, so that if you imagine that the actual fibre being that shape, it's got little microscopic indentations all the way along the length to make them hold more water, and they've been specially treated to remove static electricity, so they should be a very high quality brush indeed. I don't usually work with Sable synthetic or natural synthetic mixes. I usually use one or the other, and my go-to brushes for many years now have been Prolene Plus by ProArt. That's what I tend to use. I do use Sable, I do use Kolinsky. I have a tendency not to put them in videos very often because I just end up getting emails and comments off people that are actually pretty aggressive, which I don't think is really necessary. I mean, okay, if you don't want to use Sable, don't use it. Why does it matter if I use it? Okay, sure, I'm supporting the fur industry, but you know what? I've had my brushes for 20 years, and I'm not going to throw them away just because people don't like me having them. Throwing them away, I think, is actually more disrespectful to the dead animal than using them, so at least that's the way I kind of manage to rationalise it in my odd brain, so I'm going to continue to use them. How am I going to test them today? I've got a sheet here of Bockingford from St Cuthbert's Mill. This is rough, and I've got some paint to test them out with. I was going to use Jackson's paints, but I went with not really wanting to use them up too much because I really like them. So I've got here Winsor & Newton French Ultramarine in one of their giant pans that they do, and I'll link to this if they're still available. And I've got a tube of Daniel Smith Moonglow so that I could compare from a pan and from a liquid. And just to give me a surface, I'm just using this palette. This palette actually contains my core paints, and I'm just going to use this as a surface to mix up a puddle of Moonglow, and I'm going to mix it pretty thick because I want you to see it. It's important to me. I'm going to use just clean water here, and I'm using a pipette. I have changed my water today, so it's relatively clean, and I'm just using a pipette to add it because I don't like adding water with a brush because I think you waste paint when you go back and forth. So that's how I do it, and I have a tendency to stir it in with a silicone tool or a palette knife because, again, it doesn't all get into the brush. Sorry about that horrible noise. If you stir it with a brush, it all gets kind of gummed up in the bristles, especially with tube paint, and then you lose a lot of it. So that's how I like to make a wash, as I find that I've wasted virtually nothing by doing it that way. And I've got a really thick dark wash there, and I would normally use a spray to wet these, but I'm just going to put some water on it. These re-wet almost instantaneously, so I'll put some water on it. I like to put water around the edge because it helps. Then they're kind of loose in the little porcelain ceramic trays that they're in, and bit of water around the edge kind of helps to stick them in place. So what brushes am I going to compare with? Well, I've been going through my brushes and considering what I've got. I've got Prolene Plus by ProArt, which is it's a polypropylene fibre used for suturing in operating theatres and in medical situations, and that is called Prolene. And then Prolene Plus has been treated in some way, and it's a mixture of different fibre widths. I've also got traditional Prolene, and I've only got that in a huge size because I don't use it other than for applying washes, really. I have got... Let's do the full range, actually. Let's do the whole kind of gamut. Okay, I've got Pony Hair Synthetic Mix, which is it's an oval brush there. Actually, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use a flat, just so that the morphologies are reasonably consistent between the different brands. I have got just a cheap synthetic, which is Gold Tacklon. Cheap Sable synthetic, like the worst you can imagine. I've got a synthetic by the Society of All Artists that I don't think is terribly good, so let's have a see what that's like. And I have got a lot of brushes, so I'm having to kind of sift through them a little bit as I go. I've got a Kolinsky, which is the high-end relative of Sable. And I'm just going through my mops to try and find ones of similar size so that we can look at those. Oh, I've got Nylon by Daler and Rowney, which is their professional synthetic as well. So I've got the professional, the economy, and that's a professional natural fibre. So I'll put the professional ones together, I think. I have got some goat in here somewhere if I dig for it, but I can't see any. There's another cheap set. That's a Sable by Aquafine, a cheaper Sable, but it's 100% Sable. It's not a mix. I cannot find the brush that I was hoping I could show you as a comparator. Okay, got it. So I've got a pointed wash, as they call it, but it's a mop, by Aquafine, which is goat hair, black goat hair, and I've got another one from ProArt, which is 100% squirrel hair. So quite a selection there of brushes for comparison. I could go mad and pull out the hog bristle and all the different synthetics that I've got, but I don't think that that's terribly useful. Oh, hang on, let's add one more. We'll add one more because I have got a white nylon, and that might be a useful comparator. They don't hold much water, but it could be useful. So I'm going to put the comparator brushes out of the way. I'm going to just shove them up to the top there. And let's get a look at these brushes. So I'm going to open up the studio set first of all. I love Jackson's packaging. I think they have a really nice, clean, but modern and fashionable aesthetic, which is nice because a lot of brush manufacturers tend to overload their packaging, and paint manufacturers as well, with paintings or photos of the brushes. But what Jackson's do that I like, that many do, is that their product is its own advertising. So a bit tough to get into. Okay, so that's the Studio Synthetic, and the adhesive on these is really quite tough, so I probably should have used scissors, but I thought I can just peel that open, that'll be easy. Oh, I should have known better. And these are the Icon, which came highly recommended, and there's a lot of very good reviews on them. So they're still covered in gum arabic, so I'll wash these while we just talk. So just to show you that one difference that's really obvious is the handles. The Icons have slimmer handles, Studio Synthetics have a chunky handle, and the Studio Synthetic are gloss and the Icon are satin. So there's a very clear difference between them. You would be able to tell the difference between the handles. Ferrules are very similar. The bristles on the Studio Synthetic, this particular one, are not gum arabic. They're just as is, whereas these ones are treated. They're probably, the Studio Synthetic have longer bristles. That's the only thing I can see that's different. Let me just wash these. So those who don't know, brushes are usually dipped in gum arabic just to keep the bristles straight when they're in transit and on the way to you, and it's really tempting to just get them and crack them, and you can damage the hair by doing that. I mean, I do it sometimes, but one shouldn't. It's best to wash them quite thoroughly in clean water. And I'm going to explain my water jar to you just very briefly because, okay, so that's got them clean. I'm just drying them a little bit because then I can compare them a little bit more. Just want to show you my water jar. It's a Le Parfait preserving jar. I don't know if you can see the writing here. That writing on the inside of the jar is concave. So there's a series of invaginations on the inner surface of the jar that correspond to those letters. And if you drag your brush back and forth against them on the inside of the jar under the water, cleans your brush without putting too much pressure on it. So I find that a really good way to clean my brushes without damaging them, and I will I'll put the details of how to buy those and where to buy them on my webpage, because I have had people ask me before where I get them, because they're a really good way of not damaging one's delicate brushes. So let's just compare the basic properties. Studio brush, first of all, bends pretty easily, doesn't really have much snap. The Icon, stiffer. It's damp, so it's hard to tell, but I think it has got a little bit more spring to it. There is a clear difference in the fibres. That's not the same fibre in both. They're very clearly quite different. So I'm going to just go through the others and clean them off. Don't put these things back on brushes. It's a sure way to trap hair. But they're great if you do monoprinting or acrylic painting, making little circles. Great for art journaling and mixed media. Fantastic, useful little tools to have. But don't keep every single one you get, just one in each size, because you end up with drawers full. And I'm speaking from experience there. So these are the studio ones are washing out really quickly. They don't have they have very little gum arabic on them actually. Probably because they're a stiff fibre and they don't need it. I don't think it's an attempt at being cheap. So that's those clean. And now I'll do the icon. These have a lot more. And I'm just having to massage it out of them a bit because I don't want it in the paint. It's good in the paint. It adds a glossy kind of very vibrant finish. It makes your paint look really bright if you add gum arabic to it. But I want to keep these all very similar. And now the pointed mop. So the way these are constructed, just to explain it really briefly, is instead of having a ferrule, what they have is this piece of plastic in this case, but traditionally goose quill, and the hairs are bound into one end of it with 2 copper loops, and then it's bound onto the handle with 2 more. And if you get a high-end one like the Pro Art Renaissance Squirrel, you can see the little knots there are in copper wire, and I believe these are probably synthetic actually, but sometimes you get them and they're almost braided together as well, which is something I've seen a few times. I think, yeah, on the Aquafine ones, I think that's when they're done by machine that they're braided, but I may be wrong there. This can mean if they haven't got hairs of uniform length, like the really cheap ones, that the hairs fall out. A tip with these squirrel ones and any goat brushes, wash them in cold water. Squirrel and goat tend to shrink sometimes in hot water, and that would make them fall out of this type of binding. So just keep that in mind if you have goat or squirrel in quill binding. These brushes are traditionally extraordinarily thirsty, especially when they're made with squirrel, because the belly of the brush will hold a lot of water, but the tip will form a sort of needle-like point. So you can draw really fine lines and the brush will hold gallons of water. And I can feel already that this is one thirsty brush. I'm going to squeeze out a lot of that water just to get it dried down a little bit. Okay, so we have our brushes. Let's see what we can do first of all. I'm kind of propped up here, so I'm not in the most comfortable position. I'm going to go straight away into here and take out the size 8s because they are very similar. And let's try those out first. So I'm going to use the Studio first, and I'm just going to dip it into this Moon Glow. And I'm going to draw some lines. Now the brush is wet because I washed all of them, so it hasn't got huge amounts of colour because I washed it, so I've just dipped it a little bit longer, and that's got a bit better. See what the tip is like for drawing a line. This is quite dilute colour, so it will draw a reasonably neat line, but that's not pristine. If I go into thicker paint and get a bit more on here, it sort of starts to run dry at that point. Okay, I'm just going to give that a little rinse. And try the equivalent brush from Icon. So I'm going to dip it again, not for too long, so I'm doing an equivalent movement there. Okay, you can already see this seems to hold more, and that's my first kind of observation. So now I'm doing that longer roll that I did with the other brush, trying to keep this as fair as I can. I mean, I know the Icon should be better quality, that should be plain, but I want to see if it really is better quality. That's easier to control. It keeps a much more razory point. It's not a perfect point. That's one thing I will say. Okay, yeah, you can get a pretty good point with that. It isn't brilliant because they're not a pointed wash, they're a standard brush. They're not a pointed round, they're a standard round, so it's as good as it will go. Now I'm going into that darker, thicker paint that I've mixed up, and I'm going to kind of repeat that. Okay, that's thirstier. It holds far more. It will, you know, this is starting to get patchy up here. This one's getting patchy down here, so it clearly holds more, which is what you expect. It's got Sable in it. It's got that kind of punctuated synthetic that is designed to hold more water. So that's what we would expect. Let's see how the flats compare, and we'll do these with the paint on the pan over here. So this is the studio flat. A little bit patchy there, not sure why. And I'm just swiping over the surface with very little pressure. Okay, so there's a little bit of a breaking of the line there, but it's got neat edges. I want to try side blending with it now, so I'm doing half of the brush in ultramarine, half the brush in Moonglow. Possibly a little bit too wet there, but actually that has worked. There is, oh, you can't see that. Okay, so it has side blended. It has done its thing. And the last kind of test that I would ever do with a flat, really, I mean, I don't do sort of handprint style, absolutely rigorous testing, as those of you who know me will know, is to paint with the edge and see how fine a line we can define. And then one thing I do like to do, which with a flat brush, actually it's a technique I really enjoy, I'll just do it here, is to do a line, clean my brush out and fill it with water, and then paint along so that it bleeds across. That's a technique I really like doing to add decay and mist and all sorts of other things to what I'm working on. Now, because I can't push the paper up any further, otherwise everything will fly off the end of my table, I'm going to flip this over. And then you can see the comparison of these lines here when I look at them with the other brush. Oops. Sorry, just having a technical moment there. Now I'm using the 1/2 inch from the Icon line, and again I'm just doing the same drag across the paint that I did before, and we'll see how this one goes. It's more uniform. This is a rough surface, remember, so it will show up if there's patchiness. One thing you have to remember with a thirsty brush is they do need to be held in the paint a little bit longer to allow them to pick up that extra material. So let me just pop this in here a little bit longer. There's plenty of paint and plenty of water, so it should be easy. Yeah, so you can get a really dark process with that. And let's just try side blending for fun. Side blending is one of those techniques people forget exists, but it's so useful. I'll do it the same way round as that one, which I think, yeah, you can see that, so let's see how it goes. Okay, so it picked up more of each of them, it's more even, whereas the other one didn't pick up much of the Moonglow, so the other one kind of overtook it. This one's much more even, so it does pick up paint from very wet versus quite sticky much more evenly. So just to explain, the Moonglow is quite wet, and the palette, the full pan, the giant pan over there, sorry, is quite sticky. So there is a difference in viscosity. I've deliberately done that. So here you've got a very watery paint versus a very sticky paint, and here they come out very, very similar. Let's try drawing some lines. Okay, yep, you can get a nice line with that. I like that. Oops. These are good brush control exercises, by the way, that I'm doing. So if you are coming back to watercolour after a break or new to it and you want some brush exercises, these kinds of things are pretty useful. Just going to put a bit more on there because I don't think it's really very thick. And I'm going to do the same as I did before. I'm going to blend it out with a wet brush. And that blends across beautifully. So it doesn't hold too much water, isn't too wet, isn't too dry. Let's just try putting a line of water. And then with the Studio, a line of water. And then I'm just going to use one of the rounds because this doesn't matter which brush I use for this. I'm just picking up some Moonglow and dotting it into those wet areas just to see how wet they are. I can't quite see them because of the lighting that I'm using to film, but they seem fairly similar. I would say that this one on the right, the Studio one, is a little bit drier. This one's almost pooling because it picked up quite a lot of water. So you do have to be a little bit careful with the icons. They do pick up quite a bit of water, so that's something to kind of watch out for. I'm going to try this pointed wash / quill, whatever you want to call it now. And I'm going to try it out by first re-wetting it, and I'm going to take it damp into my Moonglow, where I bet it will probably pick all of it up. No, it didn't. Picks up a lot though. Let's see how much it picks up. That's a lovely thirsty brush. Isn't that gorgeous? You can, if you hold these near the end and vertical, you can get a lovely fine line with them very often. Not as fine as I've had with other brands, and I'll show you examples of that, but that could be because I'm not used to this yet and I've got too much water on it, so we'll see how we get on with that. The reason I picked up Moonglow was I needed a dark paint, but I just quite like watching it split. It's an anthraquinone red, a French ultramarine, and a viridian. No, an ultramarine blue, sorry, and hydrated chromic oxide. Let's be really correct about pigment names. And the idea is that depending on how much water you've got, the red kind of separates because that's organic and it runs from those mineral granulating heavy pigments, and that's what you can start to see here. These areas are quite green, and then you've got a bluish tone in the middle, and the red is all over. And depending on how much water you have, you can play with that. And then I've got some green bleeding out here. It's a nice one. Reminds me a little bit of the Elegant Writer pen, for those who know about that. The Elegant Writer is just a calligraphy pen, but when you get it wet, the black ink splits into pink and turquoise, so you can make really cool effects with it. And just to show you, I did a painting with Moonglow with a pointed wash last week, and that was this little sketch really. This is just Moonglow on very wet paper. It's on Arche by Canson, and you get that wonderful decay. And I wetted this paper by running it under the tap. I got it absolutely drenched, and you get a really nice decay of those flowers descending away into nothing. I named it Grey Gardens after the movie. Many of you will get that reference, I'm sure. Some of you won't. If not, Google it. It's a great film. Well, it's a documentary, but it's great. Do watch it. So, on the whole between the two, I would say the Icon is unsurprisingly more thirsty. It holds more paint, holds more water, will form a finer line, and I think it's got slightly tighter edges on the 1/2 inch flat than the other one had. Very, very slight difference, but it is there. It absolutely is there. But there's nothing bad about either of them. Both nice brushes. So let's have a new sheet of paper. This is just a gummed A4. And I don't worry, people might be thinking, what a waste. I actually flip these over and use them as warm-up sheets, and sometimes I will take that, cut it into pieces, and use it for collage, or art journaling, or monoprinting, or print over it. I don't waste paper in that way. So we're back on a fresh piece of paper, and just to get focus, I'm just going to focus on this brush. Lovely. So I want to compare these now with other brushes, and that's not easy because I don't have all of the morphologies, if you like, in all of the lines. So let's just compare the icon first of all, because this is ultimately a synthetic Sable blend. And if I take some Moonglow on a reasonably dry brush and take it as far as it will go, which was basically the width of the paper, and now I'm going in with it wet, you can see it holds a lot of water. Again, over to the end, and I'm going to let that. So now I've got a 1 inch wide wash, and I'm going to label that. That was Icon. And I'm going to do similar effects with some other brushes of similar stature. First one is a size 16 Prolene round by ProArt. Sorry, I didn't cover that in enough paint. Prolene is very thirsty, and you have to roll it to get the coverage on all the sides. So Prolene is not as thirsty as Icon. That's the first thing we learn. I mean, okay, it's not fair testing if we're being really proper here, because I'm comparing a round with a flat. They're different shapes, different rheology and hydrology applies. And now I'm taking that same brush wet, and you can see it doesn't hold an awful lot of water. That's why I don't use the standard Prolenes. I use the Prolene Plus most of the time. I'm not saying any brush is perfect. I'm well aware of the failings of the kinds of brushes that I often use, but sorry if I was just out of focus there for a moment. I think I was. Okay, let's do a Prolene Plus. Oops. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm wetting the brush slightly first, which is what I did the first time, and I'm doing a line. So Prolene Plus again, but it's a round, not a flat, so I think some of this is an artifact of brush shape, because they both did it at the same point, and they're very different water absorbance fibres. So I would say it's probably more absorbent than either, but I don't have a flat in them, so I don't think it's a completely fair comparison. I'll just put a plus there, as that's a derivation of the other one. Let's do a Sable of fairly alright quality. The Aquafine Sable, which is the student grade from De La Rowney, I think is not actually that bad, really, as brushes go. You know, that holds a reasonable amount of paint. But again, because it's a round, it's running out at the same point. These are 100% Sable. They're not a blend, but they are cheap Sable. They're like the crap left over after all the main brush manufacturers have had their fill. Good quality Kolinsky by Winsor & Newton. Ooh, forgot my water. Next, these are really thirsty. Not as thirsty as Squirrel, but they are really thirsty, which I think you can see. I think you can see how much darker that is. This is a one stroke rather than a flat, so it's a little bit longer, and I think that probably outdid it. So that was a 1/4 inch one stroke, so it is a smaller brush. We have to kind of allow for the fact that we're not using exactly the same morphology. I think I'm off the bottom of what you can see now. So I'm going to do a little flip over. There we go. And remember, I'm comparing brushes of similar quality here. I'm not comparing, no point in me comparing student grade with high quality. It's a bit silly. So this is a squirrel mop, a 100% squirrel mop by ProArt. I have just put a bit of water into the paint because I'm running a little bit low of this wash, so that goes all the way across because it's super absorbent, and it's a mop. You know, it's intended to do that. This mop is a size 2, considerably narrower than the one that Icon range has got. So this was squirrel, and I'll do the Icon pointed mop / quill as well, so that you can see that. I am running very low on this paint though. I'm going to have to mix some more. So just bear with me a few moments. We're going to get the horrible scratchy noise again now from my silicone tool. I don't think I've made this wash quite as thick as the last one, so you will see some variance, but we're not looking for how much colour, we're looking for does it get all the way across the page, really. I'll deal with cleaning that later. Just check you're in focus. Yes, you are. Sorry if my voice is a bit quiet when I'm sitting down. I can't stand very easily right now, so having to sit a little way away. So this is the Icon one. And that's got, you know, similar to the squirrel. It's very similar. It's much cheaper. If you buy these individually, even the huge one is cheaper than one of the smallest squirrel ones, which is pretty cool that you can get it that cheap. I like that mop actually. That's a really nice brush. I'll talk a little bit about the sort of physics of them, how well they handle, how they feel in a minute when I whiz through again so that you can see them. I'll do the Daler and Rowney Nylon, which is sort of similar quality, I guess. Okay, I know there was a little spot there, but that won't be why that's so pigmented. It's because this fibre has a particular affinity for pigment, it seems. I've seen this with it all the time, that it will always pick up a ton of colour. It can actually be a problem if you're not used to it, or if you're painting with several brushes at once and you don't concentrate, you can quite easily overpower things. So that's all of the kind of professional quality brushes that I wanted to compare to. I will do the Society for All Artists synthetic, which is a yellow gold Taclon, quite snappy. I'm not keen on it myself. I got it free. It's a size 6 round. It's the one they call the worker in their parlance, because of course every brush size needs a name for some bloody reason. It holds really very little. Doesn't feel nice. I don't like the handle, I don't like the brush, but you know, what can you do? It was free. No. I wouldn't put that in the same ballpark as these other brushes. It doesn't feel right. It scrapes on the paper. It feels dry. So sorry, Society for All Artists. I know you're probably really proud of it, but it's just not me. And that's one thing that's really important to state. Brushes are quite a personal taste. They're like underpants. you wear what you like and what you feel comfortable in and what you feel confident in, and what works for someone else doesn't always work for you. So brushes really are very down to personal taste. That's why I try and show you lots of properties rather than just say this one's crap, because that's not good. So I'm going to go, while that dries down a little bit, I'm going to go through the same process with the Studio synthetic this time, and some of the cheaper student grade brushes that I've got, which I have for several reasons. One is that I've never thrown them away. Two is because I teach on YouTube, so I have a lot of brushes, so you can see that one kind of starts to run out of steam. And because sometimes when you're painting something, you need a brush that you're kind of able to brutalize, for want of a better word. You need a brush you can really go to town on and cause pain to, and you don't want to do that to, you know, your best Kolinsky brush. And so I sometimes will buy really cheap rubbish brushes for that reason. The other reason I have them is that I sometimes buy, especially for art journaling and crafting, those big bags you get in craft stores of like 40 different really rubbish brushes that are like, you know, gold Teclon synthetics, cheap arse end of the animal, squirrel, really awful foam brushes, those kinds of things, because they're great for putting glue on, and I don't care if they only last a few months. That's where these kinds of brushes come from, that are a mixture of synthetic and Sable of questionable quality. And what I actually use this brush for is pouncing to make brick walls and that sort of thing, because I have no respect for it, because it was about 30p or something. Let's see what it actually handles like, because I've never actually tried this. It's a 3/4 inch flat wash by Daler and Rowney, and I think it's from their Simply line, which is the economy line, so below student quality. Yeah, you can see some patchiness there. But actually it got to the end, it's pretty absorbent. I mean, it had a bit of patchiness. You know, see, I laugh at these awful brushes, but they're not actually that bad. What I will say about it is it feels like goat, because it's kind of puffy. It's kind of like too soft and it won't form a flat edge. It's really annoying, and it hasn't got a flat edge. I mean, look at that. Really horrible little brush. Sorry, Daler and Rowney, I know you're a brush company, but the Simply line is, you know, it's not intended for fine art, really. It's intended for people that are 8 years old and just want to experiment. So I'll put Simply there. It hasn't done a bad job, but I don't think it's done a terribly good job either. In a way, in some ways, it has really nice granulation compared to here, but that's because it held so much water and then dumped it all at the beginning. So you get better granulation when you've got lots of water, and it dumped all the water at the beginning and then ran out of effort. From the line in the UK that's called Graduate, but in the US it's called Simply Simmons, which is by Daler and Rowney again. It's their low-end student line. I've got a size 12. Right, I mean, look at that. It's a synthetic. It's not intended for watercolour. It's an acrylic brush. They do actually have in that line brushes intended for watercolour. So that just shows what a really bad gold Teclon will do. That's a gold Teclon with a bit of finish to it. And it can't hold enough. So that does show that these brushes are better than straight gold Teclon. That perforation that they have is worth it. This is gold Teclon mixed with horsehair that I'm doing next. And I am running out of paint again. Yeah, I didn't think that would last the whole way. These are actually, as beginner watercolour brushes go, Pony Synthetic are actually pretty good, because they don't hold a lot of water, so they're good when you're just trying to get the hang of control, and very wet brushes are not what you need at that point when you're an absolute beginner. They're not top of the list of what I recommend, but I think they're actually good for people that struggle with brush control. Let's forget that one. This is Pony Synthetic, and now I'm going to have to flip the paper upside down. I'm probably going to have to switch to the other paint because I'm running out of Moon Glow, unless I'll mix some more. YOLO. It's become my excuse for everything right now. Right, I'll just have to focus that in a sec, but I'm going to mix some more Moon Glow up. These Daniel Smith tubes seem to last an eternity. I don't know why I bought Moon Glow in the big tube. I think it was on offer when I bought it. I can't think why else I would have done, because I was just curious. I had never tried it before, and I wanted to see why everyone was kind of like, Moon Glow's amazing. You know, it's nice, but so what? It's very limited. It can only really do one thing. Some people mix it, and someone told me the other day, if you mix it with Rose of Ultramarine, which is Quin Rose mixed with French Ultramarine, you can make really good bruises. I can see why. I think that really would work quite well. Okay, so I've mixed that up. Where was I? I was doing white nylon. White nylon is really intended for acrylic, but again, it can be good for lifting because it's a bit stiff, so that's why I have it around the place. And I've clearly been using it with phthalo blue because this one is completely blue. Doesn't hold a lot of water, but it will hold a lot of paint because the hydrophobic paint will stick to it. And I think it has got some level of treatment to it. The Pro Art white nylon, which is from their Polar range, which is that one, the Pro Art Polar White, they're really good. They're great for lifting or for when you want to do fine detail lines where you don't want a ton of water. So, not really sure how I rate that, but I don't think it was very good. You know, every brush has a purpose. You can't make every brush do everything. And that's why I'm road testing here, because I want to be able to show you what these brushes are better than and worse than, so you can get a feel. And this is a mop again. It's a 2 by Aquafine. These are goat. This is black goat, which is really absorbent, and it also shrinks, so you have to be quite careful with it. So it might shed fur. I mean, look how much that holds. It's ludicrous. Goat holds so much, but it can be very hard to control. The hairs fall out, and it doesn't form a nice point. Squirrel does form a nice point. Some people will be going, oh, you do the water line faster with some than others. Well, yes, I do. It depends how much water's already on there. I just do it so that I don't end up with a massive puddle. So we've tested all the major fibres that are out there, not every brand. I don't think there's anything else worth doing. Gold Teclon in general, I like. You know, brushes like these, Gold Teclon Skyflows, 3-inch Skyflows for like £10 by Aquafine are great for wetting paper, but look how shiny they are. I like them. You know, they don't have a problem. There's nothing wrong with them at all. I often will use a goat hake brush for the same thing, or a goat blending brush, but goat does shed. You have got to be a little bit mindful of that. Yeah, I've definitely done all the main fibres that I've got in my brush collection. I have got a few things like Simply Simmons do something called Dark Tip Synthetic. I don't know if you can see it. Look at me, I'm like a beauty vlogger doing that. Dark Tip Synthetic is what it sounds like. I don't know what they do to the tips, whether they shave them or radiation treat them or something, but it makes them very absorbent. But I've only got them in riggers and fans, which of course I can't use for this kind of demo. So there we are. Right, let me put, oh, I've still got a load of Moon Glow there, and it would be a shame to waste it, wouldn't it? Let's see if I can paint one of those flowers from the Grey Gardens scene. The background isn't soaking wet though, so oh no, I'll take. That was a Prolene 1-inch 1-stroke, and a 1-stroke is like a long flat basically. I'll zoom out for this. I just wet this. Bockingford's a chemical pulp paper. Alsh is cotton and hard sized. This is not, so this won't look anything like the same. Oh, look at that, it just dropped off the end of the brush because I didn't tap it off. It's wet into wet, obviously. Problem with this paper is this paper is going to pool on the surface a bit more. But this brush has got the same kind of control. Doesn't look like it because it's all kind of faded away and bled, but that's kind of the style I like to do, these little decaying flowers. Something morbid about painting decaying flowers, isn't there? But whatever turns you on, and it keeps me off the streets, that's what you need to remember. I'll do a neat one. It's probably off camera. Oh no, I've zoomed out, it's on camera. One thing I've learned is when I'm using a new brush, I get really shaky. Yeah, you can do neat pointy lines with this. You just have to be careful with the water. They're nice brushes. I'm pleasantly surprised again. I was pleasantly surprised with Jackson's paint yesterday. I am pleasantly surprised with these brushes today. You can print with them as well and make petals, which you can do with mops. You can make little daffodil kind of shapes with them, which is cute. You can do leaves with them by just pushing down and pulling. I like that shape of brush, they're really cool, so versatile. And if you're buying brushes for someone as a gift, if you get them something like that, it's almost like having a rigger and a round in one. They're so cool, really useful brushes. One last test I want to do. Oh, look at that. I don't know if you can see this, but let's zoom you in. Can you see here? You can see the green coming out of the moon glow. Really pretty. So before we kind of pull everything back together and evaluate, let's do the most important thing you have to do with a new brush. I'm going to take this page off, and I'm not going to use another sheet. What I will do is see if I've got half an old sheet I can use. Yeah, the first sheet I did these brush trials on. We'll use the back of that. Bockingford has a back and a front, if you've ever used it and you're a bit confused about that. It does, I think it does. I don't think the back paint's quite the same way, and I know I probably transferred some paint, but this is the pad I use just for videos, so it's fine. This is my Jackson's set, and I will link to the video up here and probably in the end cards that I was playing with in my video yesterday, and I wanted to see, these are totally dry, totally bone dry. Let's just see what happens with, I'm going to use two equivalent colours, okay? So a bit of understanding first. Cadmium yellow is cadmium zinc sulfide, cadmium red is cadmium sulfoselenide. Chemically, similar hydrophobicity, so they will wet in a similar way. So this is a fairly fair test. I'm going to take a brush that I have squeezed almost all of the water out of, wet it again, and shake off all of the excess, and I'm going to do one line across. Okay, see, I'm seeing how much I can pick up. Re-wetting it, and I'm going to do 1, 2, 3. Why 3? It's my default. When I test a new paint out to see how well it lifts, I always do 3. So that's lifted a bit better. Remember, this is dry paint. Haven't pre-sprayed it or anything. Yesterday I was painting with Prolene, which is a little bit more abrasive, and you're wondering why this is a bit dirty. It's because I dirtied it when I was playing with it earlier on. I just haven't cleaned them yet. Okay, let's go with completely wet brush now. Okay, yeah, so now it picks up. That was the studio. So what I'm looking at here really is its ability to lift, how aggressive it is, how abrasive it is. And I would usually expect a studio to be a student brush to be a little bit better at that than a grown-up brush, for want of a better word. So with the cadmium red now, one stroke across. Ooh. That did a lot better. And now I did 3 the next time, didn't I? 1, 2, 3, and I can see, because this holds more water, it is doing a better job. And then again, it's dirty because I got it dirty. I'm only coating one side of the brush here, remember, I'm not coating both sides. And this is not very wet paint, this is quite dry paint. So I've glazed over that. I haven't really mixed too much because the bottom layer is so dry. The ability to glaze is pretty important actually, so let's see whether these will glaze or whether they'll lift the underlying layer. And to do that, I'm going to take some paint from yesterday, from that same video. This is cadmium red from that set, and this, sorry, cadmium red, it's cadmium red light actually. This is cadmium red light, and this is cadmium red light that's had gum arabic added by me during that video to give it that kind of glossy finish. Let's have a look at, so this is the studio brush first of all. Again, and I'm going to glaze over that. What should we glaze over red with? Let's use cadmium yellow, and we'll get a nice orange. So again, the brush is a bit grotty, so we have to keep that in mind. I didn't need. The reason I'm using cadmium red as the underlayer for this test, by the way, is because cadmium red will lift. It's a pigment. It's a inorganic mineral pigment, and it will lift. So if your brush is really aggressive, it will lift it up. I'm going to do it again with an inorganic. Let's use Hansa yellow, lemon yellow, Hansa yellow 10G. Why am I doing that? Really easy reason. If I run a mineral over a mineral, you're running 2 abrasives against each other, so the chance of lifting is higher. If you do a non-mineral as one of them, you're running something that's not very abrasive, and so much less lifting. There is lifting here, I can see it, but I don't have it with that one. That was with the studio. Let's get my icon ready now. This is my icon. So we did cad yellow first. I'm going to have to work quite close up to there. You can see how much more paint this holds. So for glazing, you have to be careful with the amount of paint, otherwise you're going to get opacity like here. So you can really see how different the amount of pigment that they will hold is when you really rub them on the paint and let it pick up as much as it will pick up. And then I'll do the lemon again, just off the bottom here. And even though that picked up rather a lot, okay, it moved a little bit there. Well, we just let that dry because I think you can't really inspect glazing while it's wet. Let's just have a look at the brushes themselves and how well they handle. So I'm going to take the two 1/2-inch flats. I think the Studio Synthetic feels heavier to me, but it's like it's just a wooden handle, so it's not terribly well weighted. But the Icon feels like it's weighted better because the handle's almost more lightweight, and a lot of the weight is at the ferrule, so it feels nicer in the hand. I don't know if that's true with the rounds. I'll just try with size 8 rounds. So the Icon, yeah, has got the weight on the end, whereas the Studio is kind of light, but the whole thing is equal weight. And that lovely where's it gone? Oh, for goodness sakes. Got it. That really lovely mop. A lot of the weight is here, because of course this weighs nothing, there's no ferrule. The reason this is fat here is so that the weight is here and you've got a bit of counterbalance at this end. They're designed in a very, very clever way. The wider this gets, the more counterbalance you need, the longer it has to be to counterbalance it off. You can see that if you compare it with this Renaissance squirrel that's much smaller. So that is really weighted very well as well. So I like the way they're weighted. I think the diameters are good. They feel nice in the hand. They don't feel craply made. You know, the ferrules are not loose. I felt that with all of them while I was getting out the packets. They all feel firm and they feel well made. So that's encouraging. Let's have a look at water hold. So the this is the 1 inch, the ½ inch icon, first of all, was down here. And it picked up enough and it went all the way across. A little bit too much water at the beginning. It was very broadly similar, and I can only say broadly similar because the brush morphologies are different to Prolene and Prolene Plus. It's somewhere in that region, but I would say it picks up more pigment. I really would. That may be a morphological thing though. Going through the others. Sorry, a second. Sorry, I just had something pop up on the screen there. Going through the others, the only one that holds anywhere near the amount is Nylon. So I would say those professional brushes are all really similar. Those ones. I would say the Society of All Artists and the Kolinsky and the Sable, they hold a bit less, but that's because they're smaller brushes, I guess. Society for All Artists, really not impressed with. Squirrel was probably very similar as well. So all the high-end brushes are very similar, I think, and an Icon was certainly one of them. The Studio line actually did pretty well itself. I mean, we got pretty nice there, and the Simply brush that we used was good there, and as were the others. I mean, the all of them really kind of did their job. The goat was certainly okay. I don't think there was anything terrible about any of them, but I would say that I think that the Studio brush, I think, did a better and more consistent job. So as student brushes go, I think it was probably better than Aquafine brushes in my experience. I know I didn't road test them all side by side, but the Gold Taclon from Aquafine, which is this very soft Gold Taclon, I think is not as good. I think you get more control with the Jackson's ones. I think they're better in that regard. Let's have a look at the glazing. So you can see, first of all, with the Studio, you've got a little bit of dislodging of the red there, but not here. So when using abrasive pigment, the Cad Yellow, the abrasive brush with the abrasive pigment can lift a little bit. You don't get that with the Hansa Yellow though, that was fine. The Icon picks up so much more pigment than the student brush, the Studio brush, without the abrasiveness, and it's really clean and crisp with all of them. So I would say on the whole, the Icon is, you know, what's not to love. I'm just going to open this so it can dry out. The Icon is really what's not to love. I would say that the Studio brush is brilliant. I mean, it's a really nice student brush. The Icon brushes are better made. They are weighted better. They've got Sable in them, so okay, they're not they're not vegan brushes. That's a big consideration for some of you, I know, but for others, if you don't mind having Sable in your brushes and you want a better brush, you are paying at full price. The difference between the two sets, the Studio is £11, the synthetic is £16.50, so you're paying an extra £5, and with the discounts that are on at the moment, okay, the Studio set's like £5.50, the other one is £13.20, so you're paying nearly double at the moment because they're on discount. But hey, you're not paying much more. You know, you're paying very similar prices to get the Icon set if you want it. What I will say about these as sets, they both contain a ½ inch flat. You need one of those. I think, so let me backtrack. I think every beginner, or as a minimum if you're doing en plein air, the minimum brushes you need are a ½ inch flat, an 8 round and a 12 round, and in the ideal world a 10 round. And when you get better and you need better brushes, a mop, quill, whatever you want to call it, is a really, really good brush to have. I would say that you will at some point need much smaller brushes, but I think these are really good sets. You know, an 8 and a 10 round and a ½ inch flat in the Studio set is exactly what you need as a beginner. It is the perfect set for a beginner. If you want to buy someone a present this Christmas as a beginner watercolourist, get them that if they've never painted before. If they're a bit more experienced, get them the Icon. They'll get a really good quill, an 8 round and a ½ inch flat. So 2 essential brushes, and an essential brush as you move upwards the quill. Not much difference in price. I've already said this, but the Jackson's watercolours, great Christmas present. Go over to my website, it's linked down there. You can find the links for buying them. Again, I have to reiterate this, Jackson's had not paid me. I have not been told to say any of this. They gave me these paints and these brushes, and I didn't ask for brushes. I said, can I review your own brand watercolours? And they said, oh, let's give you the brushes as well. I'd love to know what you think of them. And it very much was, what do you think of them? It very much was, we'd love to see, a video review of them. We'd like to hear what you think about them. I drive a lot of sales across Amazon and Jackson's, Ken Bromley and so on. People do listen to what I say, evidently. I can see that from my affiliate reports. So I would say I really love these products, the brushes and the paints. I am really, really impressed with them. So I haven't been told to say that at all. This is not the paid promotion. I wasn't given any money for it. I was just given them to review, and that's all. So there'll be one more video from me as a review, and that will be of the Akoya long-handled size 6 flat synthetic, which is for oil or heavy body acrylic. So I will demonstrate it with both. And we'll have a look at what that's like, and we'll compare it to other brushes, to hog bristle and to high-end acrylic brushes, and we'll see how we get on with that. And then there's going to be a tutorial using the Jackson's paints and the Jackson's brushes to do some watercolour, and I'm coming up at the moment with some ideas for that, and it's going to be very earthy and very wintry, but not snowy. It's going to be like, those days in midwinter where the sun's very low in the sky, it's kind of grey-ish, almost. It's not misty, but it's kind of dull, and you've got the sun coming at a funny angle through the bare trees. It's going to be that kind of idea. So check back for that, maybe in a week or two, because I've got to practice it a few times and optimize it so that it works for people of different abilities and with these paints that I'm not very familiar with. So I've got to learn the limits and foibles of the paints and the brushes a little bit as I go, because I don't want to kind of screw it up and have to resort back to my old faithful brushes. I want to do it with Jackson's products because I really like them. So, thank you.